The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
And hello, folks. Welcome to today's Monday edition of the Whitfield Report. And by the time you're listening to this episode, this will be the week of Christmas. Merry Christmas to you all, or Merry Early Christmas, I guess. Happy for you all to be here. Joining me today is Mr. James Dawson, who is in a very unique perspective because James is an author who's published a few short stories and is currently working on a novel, but he hasn't actually fully published a novel yet. And that's kind of a unique perspective because a lot of the authors that I've had on this program before, notably Eric Bishop, I see that James has a few of Eric's books in the back. Love it. A lot of the authors I've had on have already published, a few books under their belt, or at least one. Mr. Dawson here is in the process of writing a book, as I understand it. So, we're talking to him kind of before he makes it big and whatnot, which I know he's going to because he's an awesome guy, and we've both been published in a few short story collections together, so that's awesome. But I want to welcome James Dawson to the program. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, thanks, Sam. I appreciate that introduction. I'm doing great. I appreciate you working with my schedule as obviously it's not for anything writing related, but the Dawson family calendar is packed and it's a work of art. So I appreciate you juggling around to fit me in for an interview. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you taking the time. It's trying to find guests to do the podcast like towards the end of the year, like around December, is always it's always difficult because of the holidays, and it's like right before Thanksgiving to basically like the end of the year, like nobody's available, and then the week before, like the last week of December, I always get people who are like DMing me like, hey, can I get in on the first week of January? And I'm like, well, I don't know yet. I've got like 5 other people messaging me too about the beginning of the year. It's all a juggling act with podcasting as well. So I certainly understand.
Yeah, I think that's just life in general. That this time of year is so jam packed with events and things like that, and we just working local family stuff, trying to get out to do some of the local holiday lights that we like to get out and go see. It's just hard to kind of figure out everybody's schedule and who can meet up when and what days work for what and who doesn't have
Yeah.
anything else going on. So it's a juggling act in all aspects of life this time of year.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So, well, just to kind of start off, what is your general background and whatnot? I guess just to start off. So.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, I've been let's see. Yeah, my day job, I'm a vice president of marketing for a local credit union here. So I work in the executive world of financial marketing. So people always ask my wife, like, "Oh, you're married to a banker?" She's like, "No, he is not a banker. He is not." I work in the creative side of the financial industry, which has its own storytelling aspects. But as far as the writing world goes, I've been writing in the novel world for probably about 10 years now. But when I met my wife, I was a part-time stand-up comedian, a part-time bartender, and a part-time bank teller. So I had three part-time jobs when I met my wife. Somehow she saw potential in me, and off we went. But as you're raising a family and building that lifestyle, telling jokes on the road and being a comic when you're not getting paid in a couple of Bud Lights and a half dozen chicken wings to tell jokes at a bowling alley in Eagle Rock outside of LA. It's not a great way to build a family relationship and a dynamic when you're gone in the middle of the weeks.
Yeah.
Kind of started I hung up that storytelling aspect of my life, and but that creative juice just didn't go away. And then when we had young kids, you're watching a lot of Pixar movies and Disney movies, and there's still that storytelling aspect that never went away. So about 10 years ago or 9 years ago, something like that, I wanted to write a book and tell some sort of story. And I was kind of looking at lengths of books that are written, and a big giant thriller felt overwhelming. Trying to get 90,000 words down on a page felt like a task
Yeah.
that would be a hard mountain to climb out of the gate. So I looked at middle grade novels are about 30,000, and that seemed like an easier jumping off point than something grander. And said we were watching a lot of Pixar movies, and you've kind of followed that story. They have a certain storytelling pattern Pixar does. You're watching a Pixar movie, so you can kind of get the gist of it. So I wrote a middle grade novel just to see if I could do it, and I did it. And it sits in a 3-ring binder down here on the back shelf, and 3 of my 4 kids have read it. The youngest, who's 7, I'm sure she'll be next, but that's kind of where that lives. And after I wrote that one, I was like, man, I wonder what's next. And the YA, young adult novel, was 50,000 words, and then so I took up the NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month Challenge, in November, the following year, whenever that came up next, and did 50,000 words in 28 days. Something just a blistering pace for me, and for most writers to put that number of words down in that short of time. I was getting up at 4 in the morning writing till we had to get up and get the kids out the door and get to the day job, writing in my lunch breaks, stop at the library on my way home to write. And after those 28 days, I finished early because I hit the mark a couple days early before the end of November. I was fried. I just want to sleep in. I wouldn't mind, just taking a break. And I took a break, and I sat down a few weeks later to write. I had lost the whole tone, the whole voice of the story, how the character sounded.
Oh
And
no.
I just felt so intimidated sitting there. I would stare at the screen and just like, man, what was going on in this part of the story? And
Yeah.
it should have been close to wrapping up, and I just couldn't. And I just stepped, and I stopped. I stopped writing, and that was probably 2018 or so, maybe 2019. And then my oldest daughter, she's 14 now, so yeah, she would have been 9 or 10 at the time. And she just kind of kept asking me, "Hey, what's up with that story? What's up with that story you're writing?" It sounded pretty cool. It's um, about a cult that took over like a small mountain village, and that the whole mountain village is kind of ran by, the had this kind of joyous Santa's village vibe, kind of focused on, had this one hub that was kind of very Christmas related, and huge theme. And then, a cult comes in and kind of overtakes the city, the town and the high school and stuff like that. But so she just kind of kept pounding me on it. And it was 2020, 2021, I discovered Jack Carr.
Nice.
I discovered Jack Carr, and I don't know if it was an interview, maybe he was on Rogan, I had no clue who he was. I didn't even read that much. I don't really read thrillers at the time, and I was listening to his interview, and he was talking 100 miles an hour. I was just so excited, his enthusiasm. I was like, I gotta check this guy out. So I bought the Terminal List and read that, and I was like, whoa, this is
Yeah.
out there. This is pretty incredible. It kind of got me excited to write again. His enthusiasm for writing, how he talked about writing, how he talked about the process of it all, and then his book was so engaging. I was like, you know what, I got to finish that. I got to finish that novel. I got to finish that
Yeah.
YA novel. So I started taking the laptop to, our other daughters were doing ballet or whatnot, and I would just sit in the hallway while they're doing their practice and just crank out and just write. Then I probably filibustered on wherever this scene was I picked up on. It's probably now 8 chapters way too long because I was just trying to remember the voice and just typing away and cranking away at it. And then finally picked up again and I finished it. And it's way too long for a YA. It's like 70,000 words. So
Yeah.
I've done 0 editing on it. But I think my oldest has read it. And then I'm trying to think my 13-year-old son has read it. I think he probably read it too. And, and again, that sits in a 3-ring binder down here. I've done 0 checking in on it, but I think there's some bones and probably both of those if I go back and edit them. But that's still not my natural voice. I like to swear. I like to talk about kind of more
Yeah.
heavy hitting topics and things, have a little more action, a little more violence. So, especially
Yeah.
after discovering Jack Carr, I was like, I want to write a thriller. So I've been working on this manuscript now. It's gone through so many variations, and I think I finished it originally at about 90,000 words. And then I met David Putnam, who's a crime thriller author. He's got the Bruno Johnson series,
Yep.
and a few other books out there. At our Barnes and Noble out here, he's got a shelf and a half in the thriller and suspense section. So I met him randomly because the Barnes and Noble is right across the street from my work. And I'll walk there every couple of months. I'll just kind of go across the street and just walk the aisles and check things out. And this particular day, he was sitting there signing books. So I talked to him for a while, and he gave me his information. He was like, "Oh, you're a writer." He lives down in Temecula, which is hour and a half or so from me. And he was kind of, I run a writers critique group, at my house. We meet on Thursdays. If you're ever interested, reach out. And I was like, yeah, okay. And then that was earlier in the year of last year, 2024. And a few months in, I was editing the hell out of this manuscript and I think I just realized if I really want to take this seriously, I should ask for help from those that have been there and done it before.
Yeah.
Particularly when they're prolific and they have, a substantial body of work. And he was kind enough to talk to me, and he gave me, his contact information. So I reached out to him and said, hey, Dave, I met you, 4 or 5 months ago at the Barnes and Noble. We talked a little bit. You mentioned a writers critique group. What does it cost? What's the process, whatnot? And he emailed me back almost immediately. He was like, it's completely free. It's at my house. We're meeting tomorrow at noon if you can come down. So I kind of looked at my schedule at work. I was like, I could probably peel out of work a little bit early and head down to Temecula. So I checked, make sure all the kids were set in the afternoon. My wife was taken care of. She was aware of it. I was like, I'm going to go down to this writer's critique group. And you go and you read 5 double-spaced pages, essentially, 5 to 10, I think it is. And you go, and then, just go around the table. Everybody reads if they want to read, and then they critique, and they're out. Everybody's reading stuff from memoirs to sci-fi to thrillers to literary novels. There's all kinds of stuff being read at this table, and there's 7 to 10 people sitting there, and it was fascinating. And I read, and I got some harsh feedback, and it was okay though because I understood that they were coming from a place of encouragement and really trying to make it better. They weren't trying to tear me down. They were like, they would say what they liked first, and then, oh, this part, your POV's all over the place. You're jumping, your head hopping from this person to that person. Okay, I understood that. And then, so I went a few times to those, and David Putnam's been great. I met with him for coffee. He just kind of just spilled out all his knowledge of how he takes on writing and things like that. So, so this novel, he's like, you know what, for your debut novel, if you're going full length thriller, you really want it to be about 70 to 75,000 words. You're at 90 now. You got to cut. You have to cut. So I then cut this novel down to from 91 to 72. Sent it off to a developmental editor. Got those back this summer, and that was not a harsh reality. It was a good reality. She had a lot of positive things to say about the bones and the structure and the stories and the characters. But there was a lot of growth I had to do. So I got through those developmental edits. That was a bit of a slog, but I got through them. Made some rewritings, some more, picked up the pace quicker in the novel. First, second chapters were off and running instead of kind of a slower burn that I had before. But now it's back up to like 82,000. No, I got to cut again, and we're getting real close. But I am hopeful and determined to have this thing out in 2026. So that's a long journey of where I come from, what my background is. But
Yeah, no,
I took the long way.
it's a, it's a process, and we all have different ways of, getting where we're at. I find it really interesting how you and I both kind of have had the Jack Carr connection as far as like influencing us to write thrillers, because I had I you know I'm sure, as you know, as I've you've seen some of my posts in the Discord and on social media, I've always been a big James Bond fan, growing up. And so when I was a kid, I would write like spy, kind of like secret agent short stories. And then
Okay.
as I got older and got into high school and whatnot, I just didn't have time to, write all that much. And then same thing in college. But I had a friend of mine who I took a gap year between high school and college, and I had a friend who um, turned me on to Vince Flynn,
Okay.
who who I think he had passed that same year. Like he had passed in like 2012 or something like that. So when I uh, entered into college, Kyle Mills you know had taken over the Vince Flynn books, and he was he was awesome and amazing to read. But when Jack Carr first came on the scene with the Terminalist, like in 2018, I was really intrigued because a couple of the like the Real Book Spy and a couple of the thriller critiques were like, this guy is going to be the next Tom Clancy. This guy is going to be the next Vince Flynn. So I was kind of like, okay, well, I'm a bit skeptical, but that's a pretty tall, um, that's a pretty tall order. And then I read the first book, and I was like, about a quarter way through, I was like, wow, if this guy can write like, a thriller like this, I want to do the same thing after I graduate. And so I guess it kind of re-sparked my interest in, pursuing like writing more as like an actual thing. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's definitely interesting how, I mean, Jack's inspired a lot of people to pick up the pen, I think. And then, I've self-published a few novellas, which has been an interesting process in and of itself. So, um, real
Yeah.
quick,
How
if
many
I
are you up to now?
geez, I'm up to 7 books total, like five,
That's awesome.
yeah, five novellas and then two short story collections.
Okay.
Um,
That's great.
now, so yeah, so real quick, if I can backtrack a little bit. So what made you decide to you came up from the stand-up comedy world. So what was that like? And yeah,
There's
what
no feeling in the world like stand-up comedy. For better or worse, whether you bomb or
yeah.
whether you tear the roof off the joint, it's a feeling unlike any other. I was small growing up. Now I'm 6 feet now, 175 pounds. Growing up, I was small. I entered high school, I was 4'9", 90 pounds, had a perm. I was trying out for the basketball team, so I thought the perm would help me help me fit in with the brothers. Yeah, it was. So I had to be kind of a little bit sharp and protective of myself. So comedy and humor was kind of my shield back then, and
Yeah.
and being able to kind of give back a little bit as high school kids kind of picked on me for my son. I had good friends too that made sure I didn't get my ass
Yeah.
kicked or I didn't get thrown in a dumpster or anything like that. But like I said, when I was 90 pounds, I was soaking wet with my backpack on. I was just such a small kid. So I think my humor helped me kind of helped me get friends. It helped me, just kind of through those teenage years. and I'm a pretty quiet, reserved person naturally. I'm an introvert for the most part, but I could be a very extroverted when the time
Yeah.
comes. And I have no problems public speaking and comedy. People always like, "Oh, who are the comics that inspired you as a kid?" And everyone goes into, George Carlin and Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy and all these great comics. And I wish that was the case for me, but I had a two-sided cassette tape of Pauly Shore, the Weasel, hey bro,
Yeah.
no squeezing the juice. That guy. There was an older kid on our block, and he had this Pauly Shore album, and he made us copies, me and my other buddy Jimmy. Coincidentally, we're both Jimmys, Jimmy and Jimmy. And and I would listen to that tape at night, and it was so, there's this frat boy humor, but that's what kind of resonated with me. And I just,
Yeah.
as I kind of got older and I was kind of coming to the end of my high school, I was starting to grow a little bit and just get a little more confident. People started telling me, you're pretty funny. Like you have a dry sense of humor. You should do comedy. You should try comedy. And I never really did. I never really thought anything about it. And then I got in my 20s. I was like, that's something I do want to do. Like I should check off that box of life accomplishments is do stand up comedy. I think it'd be pretty funny. I have
Yeah.
no clue how to do it. I have no clue where to go. Some of my favorite comics are comics that I can't do their style at all. Like Mitch Hedberg is one of my all-time favorite comics. And if you're familiar with Mitch Hedberg at all, he's just very, I saw a wino.
Yeah.
I saw a wino who's eating grapes. I was like, dude, you have to wait. Like just those super sharp one-liners. I don't have that kind of humor. My humor is very storytelling involved, and smacking
Yeah.
out. And so when I was in college, I failed out of college like 3 times, so it took me 8 years to get through college. I'm not a doctor. So I was at Arizona State as I was wrapping up college, and was just, I'm like, I gotta try this comedy thing. But I didn't want to do an open mic at like a coffee shop or, VFW or something like that. I wanted to do it at a comedy club. And I found a comedy club in Scottsdale that to sign up like 4 months in advance to get on the ticket, and I did, and it was Super Bowl Sunday, and a bunch of my boys came out and supported me, and I was like, I'm gonna do comedy. Here we go, and I wrote down my whole act on like a one sheet of paper, just word for word. There were no, I didn't have bullet points. It was just the whole bit, 7 minutes of what I thought would be stand up comedy, and threw it in my back pocket and went up. It's surprising I didn't need it. I didn't have to pull it out during my first set, and there were a couple of decent jokes in there, but I didn't pull the mic out. I didn't touch the mic. I just, however it stood is how I stood. It was so awkward on stage, but you kind of
Yeah.
get that. You do it once and you get that feeling like, whew, man, that was cool. It was fun. But granted, like I said, it was 80% of the audience were my friends. It was a great time. We're having fun no matter what, even if I would have sucked completely. But it was pretty good,
Yeah.
good enough, I guess, for my first time. And then so from there, I just kept wanting to do it. That I would take breaks, and then that was probably 25, 26, somewhere around there. And then I didn't do it for a long time. And I was I moved up to San Francisco, and lived in San Francisco for about 5 years, and I was working in multifamily residential real estate. And I was bartending at the end of Pier 39, and things just weren't. Life was kind of falling apart in my early 30s. Girlfriend broke up with me and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was just like, man, what do I really want to do? What gets me going? I was, man, stand-up comedy always kind of, in San Francisco, a pretty prolific comedy scene. You could find spots to go up, pretty much any night of the
Yeah.
week. So I kind of was looking things up, and this was then maybe, internet a little bit more viable to kind of find places. So I found some spots and just started kind of going up in San Francisco. But again, life was just out of control. And then I moved back down to Southern California, and a guy I went to high school with that I hadn't really talked to much since high school, he was doing comedy. And so he reached out to me because he had heard through the grapevine that I had done a couple of sets, and I think he just wanted a ride to get to his gigs. But so I would start taking him to gigs, and he would get me some stage time, and I just started doing it more and more. and I did it for 2 years, 5 to 7 nights a week. I hosted a show on Thursday nights at a comedy club in Claremont by all the universities. Just I got pretty good, to be honest. I could do anywhere. I could do a 3-minute set. I could do a 30-minute set. I was always pushing, trying to mix it up. I would get bored telling the same jokes over and over again. I was always I was always writing. I was always, how do I make this better? How do I tell that joke better? I would think of something new. Oh, let's give that a try. But then,
Yeah.
like I said, family came up and it was just time to stop. So I didn't do comedy for 5 years. And then a good friend of mine, Trevor, he's in the boy band O-Town. And he went up in 2019. He was like, and he would cut a bunch of my shows in LA. I would do the Comedy Store, probably monthly, and he would come out and support my shows. And so he was always talking about doing comedy. So he and I know each other since middle school and high school and everything like that. So he finally was going up in 2019. So I went and watched him at the Ice House do his first set. And he did a great job, great stage presence, some good jokes. And I got my juices flowing again. Because when I left comedy, I couldn't watch it anymore. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I went from being so immersed in it to just
Yeah.
I got to step away. It was too. I don't know. It was just I just got to turn the page and focus on, building a family, building my career, making sure that those things are taken care of first. And
Yeah.
so I did that. But then again, just kind of my buddy went up, and then I think I discovered Joe Rogan's podcast, but I would just scroll for comics that I knew. Anthony Jeselnik, I listened to Sebastian Maniscalco interviews, like just these comics that I knew that I used to watch, but now it's been 5 years. Like, oh, what are these guys talking about? They start talking about that comedy process, about going up and hitting shows here and there, and it just kind of got me thinking again. Like, maybe I want to go up again. Like, I just want to see what I got. And so that was January 2020. And I put it out there like, maybe I should go back up again. And my buddy Trevor, who went up in December, he texted me immediately. He's like, "Are you serious? You want to go up?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "I got a show in 2 weeks on Melrose in LA. I can get you on if you want to do it. It'd be cool to share the stage with you." And I'm like, "All right, let's go." And so I agreed to it, and off we went. And the best part was, the last time I did comedy, I took a small break and I went up, and it sucked. I forgot how it felt to be on stage. The light was too bright for me. I tried new jokes. I forgot how to rein it all in. Because when I was going up all the time, trying a new joke was nothing. Because I knew how
Yeah.
to, if it didn't work out, I knew how to pull the audience right back into where I wanted them to go. So going back up in 2020, it's like, just stick to the hits. Just go back, listen to your old stuff, go over your old notes, and just play the same jokes. Don't try anything new, and go with that. And be very honest with the audience when you get up there. So I did that, but the night before, I was really sitting there like going over everything, and a new joke popped in my head. I was like, "Oh, I'm going to close with this new joke," like an idiot. But I haven't worked it out since, but I still think there's some good bones there. But it was a fun
Yeah.
set. Went out there on Melrose, 60-seater, little room. There's an ice chest in the back where people are bringing their own beers and having a good time. It was a fun room. I thought I'd do about 7 minutes, maybe. I ended up doing 15. It was awesome. Like, just the crowd came along for the ride, and there was no feeling. Like, just that night, I was just on such a high, because when the crowd's having a great time, they're laughing, and your jokes are hitting where you want them to hit. Truly, nothing better than that on the planet that I've felt. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna start going up once a month. My wife's like, yeah, this was awesome. This was fun. You had such a great time. You look so happy. Like, yeah, we'll figure this out. So, you could do this more often. And then, global pandemic hit and shut the world down.
Yeah.
And that was it for 5 years. But I did go up a few times last summer, did some open mics and
Yeah.
hit a couple comedy clubs and did a couple of shows. So that was a lot of fun to get back out there again. But I haven't done anything since. Been focused so much on writing, because not only the manuscript I was talking about, I've written multiple short stories, obviously Western Tales that we're both in right here.
Yeah.
So
Your story was great. Your story was great, by the way. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So
thank you. Same to you, Sam. I think after I reread mine to see how it was, I was like, I'm gonna go to Sam's story. I read yours second, so that was That was great.
Thanks. Yeah, I've gotten a lot of compliments on that character who I put in one of my novellas, and I actually your episode is going out a week from when we're recording this. But I just interviewed T.G. Brown, who will be on the next episode before you, and he was like, "Oh man, I loved your story." So I was a bit surprised because I don't want to say that I wrote that as like a throwaway because obviously I put effort in. I put a lot of effort, but that short story was originally supposed to be a chapter in one of my
Mm.
novellas, and then it was one of those chapters that I really liked, but it didn't work in the book I was writing at the time. Um,
Yeah.
so I didn't throw it in the discard pile. Rather, I was like, I'm gonna put this to the side, and maybe I can use it in the next book, or something like. And then when the Western Tales thing got announced, I'm like, well, what if I try and rework this as like a short story? So I did that, submitted it, and almost immediately, I think it was Nate who emailed me. Nathaniel Hummel was like,
Yeah.
"Dude, this is awesome." So yeah, in regards to comedy, like you picked an opportune time, I guess, to kind of dip out because it seemed like there was a period of time, definitely like when I was in college, where political correctness, and I don't want to get like too political here, but I know you and I kind of are on the same, you know, end of the spectrum. Political correctness like killed stand-up comedy for a bit while I was, at least while I was in college, especially out in California. Where you couldn't joke about really anything because of trigger warnings and
Yeah.
safe spaces and all that. So it's like, yeah, you kind of picked a good time, I guess, to dip out and then come back to comedy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely glad I missed any of that kind of stuff. I never experienced any of it, thankfully. And my humor was mine is more self-deprecating than anything. And
Yeah.
some of the more edgy jokes, sometimes they play, sometimes they don't. And I certainly there was a time I went up on that was a Sunday or whatnot. I did a show out in Burbank, and I think if you're the comedian Jim Jeffries, the Australian comic, he's
Yeah.
pretty big. I did a show, and I went up after him, which is never you don't want to follow these global headliners because they
Oh
just smash
man,
it.
yeah.
They smash the show, and then I went up and I did okay, and he was super nice. Met him in the green room, and I went up after him, and so I was having this joke about like you know my liver. I was talking about drinking. I was single at the time. I was in my early 30s, like being
Right.
single and drinking, and so I had this joke about like my and it just kind of popped in my head like my liver being so black, like my liver's so black, X, Y, Z, and I just didn't like. I just kind of glossed over it and did that set, but I was like, man, I got to figure this one out because I think that could hit pretty hard. And the roasts were kind of somewhat popular at the time, so I was
Yeah.
driving home, and there's another Flappers, the one I hosted a show at, had an open mic on the Sunday. So I reached out to the lady that hosts that open mic. Hey, can you squeeze me in? Like, I got this bit I got to work out. Like, just one joke. Like, that's it. And it's about my liver being so black. And I literally went in there, room full, 20 guys, 10 of them were probably black guys. And I did 5 minutes of my liver is so black jokes. My liver is so black. It was raised by its grandmother. My liver's so black. It wears a red suit and waits by the phone on draft day. And I did that for 5 minutes. And the look on everybody's face, there was some like a lot of laughs, and then a black guy went up after me, and he was like, "Man, you have some balls, kid. Like you have some balls." Like that was. I was like, "Well, which one was the best one?" And he told me which one was the best one. I'm like, "I agree." And so like it was fun, and no one got offended. It was just kind of like, "Wow, I can't believe this guy saying." But the comic I always toured with, my buddy Jamal, he was a black guy. Like he so we cracked jokes on each other all the time, and nothing, nothing was over the line, nothing was offensive. Like He was
Yeah,
just we laughed and we had a good time, and he would take me. He was like, "I got you a spot tonight," and I would show up, and it'd be an all black comedy show, and I'd be the one white person there, and I would
yeah,
okay, like it's sink or swim time, and it was fun, and it was not there was nothing dangerous about it. There's nothing demeaning about it. There's nothing. It was just comedy, and that's what was great, and I think that's coming back now. Where I think kind of the Kill Tony shows where kind of the
yeah,
people are making cracking jokes on each other again, and it's good natured, it's good fun. Obviously, there's a line that can't be crossed, and obviously, you don't want to demean somebody to the point of ridicule, but
sure.
if it's you want to have fun, and if you're having fun and they're having fun, humor's humor.
Yeah. Well, and, the other thing too is like you got to have, thick skin with people making jabs too. And I mean, like that's the other thing is like my friend group and I like we would roast each other and just give each other shit all the time on, stuff. So, what's interesting is uh like I have black friends who will tell like the most racist, sounding jokes about like, other black people, right? But it's all in good fun and they're not offended, but then some, usually it's some white you know, woman will be offended on their behalf or something. And that's always it's like, well, if it's like, well, if you want to be a killjoy, then maybe like comedy isn't for you or, something like that. So that's always,
Yeah, yeah, humor's like anything. It's
yeah,
art. It's subjective. What one person finds funny, another person, will take it offensive, and I think I forget who said it, but the line's kind of, that joke wasn't offensive. You found it offensive, and because one person might find it offensive, the other person's gonna laugh, and
yeah,
there's certain subjects that I would never touch, and you see that with young comics. Young comics, when I say young, I mean new comics, like they they try to push the envelope too early, too soon, and they don't have the chops for it. And it's just not, open mics are tough gigs because there's 30 comics and it gets old hearing people trying to tell, rape jokes or racist jokes, and they're just not good at it. The subject probably shouldn't even be breached anyway, but they go for it in, the name of, free speech or whatever they want to do as a comic, but you know you can't land it as an open micer, and
well,
that's just the facts.
well, the other thing is like podcasting has kind of changed things too a bit because like now, even just the format of you and I talking like this and, and not like people can crack jokes on podcasts and it's the format of podcasting. I don't want to say it's comedic entirely, but like people just it's like people have conversations, and like when people hang out, they crack jokes. There's that. I don't know if you've heard the podcast that Nick Mullen did. It's called Cumtown, which I know is like, that's a crude name, but it's three guys just,
Yeah,
riffing you know, on, just like what interests them. And I mean, it was one of those successful comedy podcasts of all time. And so the medium is changing, a lot as far as like what comedy is. The space definitely is changing, which I find interesting as well. So, um,
yeah, it, and I don't know. Podcasts are great, and certainly have opened up a lot of people a lot of information. And also, it's just nice to meet people. It's nice to talk to people. Long form, phones are down.
yeah,
Phones are off. We're not distracted by anything. I'm a Bears fan. The Bears are currently whooping up on the Browns out in the other room. Well, hopefully they were. They were before I jumped on here. So it's nice just to step away though, and meeting people. I went to BoucherCon. This was my second full BoucherCon. I went 3 years ago. BoucherCon was down in San Diego, which is a couple hours from my house, and I just went on the Saturday. that's when I first kind of was taking writing a little more seriously. I had no
Yeah.
public profile, but I'd finished the first draft of the manuscript, the crime thriller I've been working on, and I just kind of like, oh, let's check this out. Went down there, woke up at 5 in the morning, drove down, just checked it out and sat in the back and didn't talk to anybody. I did meet Jack Carr, which was cool because he was doing a book signing, which I didn't even know about, which was he just
Wow.
happened to be in town, and I just kind of it was like two stories as far as where everything was. And I just kind of walked through one of the rooms, and there he was doing a book sign. I waited for everybody to kind of go through the line. I stood in the back, and I handed him a book to sign, and he didn't even open it to sign it. He just because he saw me kind of waiting and letting people go in front of me. And then he just started asking me questions. I tried talking to him about 15, 20 minutes. It just cool as can be, tons of questions to me, asking me about what I do, what my story's about, what I like to write, what I like to read, what watch I was wearing. Like we just talked about all kinds of different stuff for 15 minutes. It just
Yeah.
couldn't have been cooler. Then signed my book, then took a picture with me, and off we went. And then that day on the way home, I was like, I was talking to my wife. I was like, I think I want to start like a public profile just for writing, as I kind of start getting more into this. And last year I went to BoucherCon in Nashville for the whole set. Had a great time. The writing community is pretty special, to be honest. I think the number of writers I've met that are just the nicest, most helpful people. And then this year again, went out in BoucherCon, New Orleans, and then I got a few books here. So you got Paul White, Cam Adams, John Stamp, Chris Mullen. I met these guys. John Adams I'd met before, Chris Mullen I met before, but then this last year out in New Orleans, we really got along well. We had lunches together. We hung out quite a bit, attended
Yeah.
sessions together. Just salt of the earth guys, super nice, super helpful. Everybody kind of pulling for each other, pushing for one another, support one another, and just you meet these people. Steve Stratton, I know, is a friend of the program. I met him last year, and then I ended
Steve
up
is
being
awesome.
yeah. Steve's like one of the nicest human beings I've ever met in my life. I met him out in Nashville last year, and then a month later, I was in Colorado for a work conference, and I just messaged him like, "Hey, are you around this area? Do you live in this area?" He's like, "Yeah, I am." I'm like, "Yeah, you want to grab a bite to eat?" He's like, "Sure." So he came over to the hotel, picked me up. We went to dinner, just had a great time, and he gave me an arc of Caribbean Harvest, his novel, which was great. And so that kind of stuff. Tracy Abramson, Ox
Yeah.
Deaver, Marcy McCurry, all these people. Like you meet these authors, and they're just the nicest human beings. It just they come from all walks of life, all political backgrounds, all kinds of upbringings, all ages. And when you talk about writing, and everybody's just so nice and just wants to help. And yeah, I'll jump on a phone call with you and talk through whatever you're working out and what you want to do and everything like that. And then you support them. It's not that hard to share people's content to try to show a little support, a little love their way, especially when
Yeah.
they have helped you along the way or took time to talk to you about what you're going through. So nothing
Well,
better in this community, to be honest.
yeah, well, so that's kind of the surprising thing for me because when I've been podcasting since like 2008. I've been doing like the medium of podcasting
Nice.
for me, like I've been at this since the beginning. And I don't even mean that as like, a brag or anything. It's just, I got into this medium before anyone really knew what it was. And to see how it's grown, and really right now we've been in like a renaissance, and it's really, it's awesome because when I started, you kind of had to be in a, well, first off, no one really knew what it was for like a real, for a really long
Yeah.
time. And then, people were kind of people would kind of put themselves into categories. And now, I mean, it's categorized somewhat as far as you've got to choose a category to put like on iTunes so that people can find and whatnot. But like now, people will have you know like I'll talk to an author one episode, and then the Wednesday show, like that's usually when I do news and politics and covering certain events. But then
Okay.
other times I'll just riff on whatever. So there's really no set rule anymore. And it's been really, what's been interesting for me is um I didn't really plan it this way, but around the time I started to get into writing, more full time was when podcasting started to, become a medium
Mm.
for authors. So it's been really interesting because I actually talked to Kyle Mills, um, earlier this year on my show. Before we went on, he was like, "Yeah, this is a new experience for me. Like authors, we never used to have to do podcasts before,
Yeah,
and now, like publishers are telling us, that like it's a good idea to, like podcasting is the new interview format. So that's,
absolutely.
it's been very interesting to talk to, people, and then I was talking to the last time I talked to Steve, Steve was telling me, he's like, you need to get Jack Carr on on your podcast. And I said, well, I appreciate that. I said, I've reached out to I've reached out to his team before, and they say I don't have enough, I don't, my metrics aren't high enough for them to be interested, which there's always that, like, thing too of,
Yeah,
like I think I would have a really good, interview with him, and I think he and I would click well, based on what
sure.
people have said. Like people are like, man, you and Jack have a lot of the same interests, and you would click. But there's the behind the scenes stuff of you know uh trying to do the business side of this, where it's
Sure.
like the nature of this show has been like one episode I'll be talking to you know a very successful author like Kyle Mills, and then the next episode I'll talk to a complete unknown.
Yeah.
And
This guy.
in both conversation, and what I tell people is I find both, types to be very informative. I think if I only tried going after the big names, then sure I could maybe do that, but I don't think it would be as informative. So yeah.
Yeah, and I asked Eric Bishop that because he had me on his podcast a couple months back, and I was like, why the hell do you want me on here? You he interviews quite a bit of prolific authors that have pretty substantial bodies of work. I'm like, why the hell you asked me on here? And he was just very honestly, you have a different perspective that isn't deep into publishing for a decade. You get to talk about the startup spots of it and what you're
Yeah.
working on, how you kind of plugged away here in these early days, and I do appreciate that. It adds a new dynamic to, like you said, to the learning experience, to the, like I said, yeah, I'm not Kyle Mills by any stretch of the imagination. Even TG Brown, like that guy, he's awesome. I did a podcast with my first podcast did with him on Ryan Persimmon's podcast, the and I quote, and
Yeah.
he was on there. That was the first time I met him. He and I had a great time on there. So he's a great guy, and he's turned out a bunch of great stuff. I was just reading his I'm sure that's a great interview
Yeah.
you did with him.
So that kind of brings up my next question. So you've written a few different novels, but you haven't published them yet. And
Yep.
I know that you're looking at like different publishers, and I have to ask, and I don't mean this as a criticism or anything. I just out of curiosity, why haven't you a lot of authors I know at your stage would just self-publish um,
Mhm.
the books. So, what is it about? Uh, what are you seeking with like traditional publishing? I guess that.
Um, you know, I'm not sold on either, to be honest. Like I met with a hybrid publisher early last year about it, and that just didn't seem right to me. Forking out, quite a bit of money
What
for
what
them
do
to help me publish.
what do you mean
So like a
by a
hybrid.
hybrid publisher?
So it's basically you pay them quite a bit of money, and then they get you into Barnes and Noble and the bookstores and help. They
Uh,
bring on the editing team and the and the book cover team and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And from there, I met with them and I got their proposals and what they wanted to do, and I was like, yeah, I'm not taking out a second mortgage on my house to get this out. I think we could do it for better. And some of it comes to that kind of old school mentality. And I was talking to Eric Bishop about this, and I'm trying to really change my thought process on, because book publishing, for whatever reason, feels like the only art form that if you go indie, somehow you lose credit. But if you're like an indie musician, you're the toast of the town. And then when you go to a big record label, somehow you're a sellout, right? And if you do
yeah,
if you're an indie, if you make indie movies, you're kind of cool and hip. But then once you go to a big studio, you sold out to the big guys. But for some reason, books have this other a flip side of that where oh, you're not able to make it in the publishing world if you went indie. But that has definitely been changing
yeah.
recently, and I've certainly been changing my thought process a lot about it, listening to interviews with agents. Jeff Clark had a great interview with I want to say her name is Jessica Berg, who is Roselit, a literary agency, and she talks about the authors she works with. She tells them you have to do both: be indie published and work on this
Yeah,
other traditional form of publishing. So I'm really understanding that a lot more, and I will, like all the likelihood, be putting this novel out myself next year. So that
yeah,
that will be the plan. But I just want to make sure it's as good as it possibly can be, and
yeah,
and I've learned a ton through this novel and this writing process for this first one. I have a couple manuscripts already in the works. I have a sequel to this one that was up to 60, somewhere in the 60,000 word count, and then Google Docs up and deleted it, and they told me it was my fault, which made me very angry at Google,
yeah. That
and
happens.
had me switch over to Proton for my emails. Anyway, yeah, so I have that manuscript. Also, I have a standalone I've been working on. It's about 56,000 words in already. Again, but I set that aside to get really focused in on these edits on the first manuscript. It's time, and I want to enter the fray of book publishing to kind of throw my hat in the ring and start learning the other side of it, the book selling side of it, to
Yeah.
the marketing pieces of it, figuring out those, you know, whether
Well,
it's how the rest of it works, how that other side of it works, because you could write and throw things into a stack under here in another thriving binder, or I could step up to the plate and put it out there.
for me, for me, the reason why I chose to like self-publish the first Shadows of Deception book when I wrote my very first one, which my first one is not like, I mean, it's good. It's good. I mean, I had to do kind of like a rewrite of it after I published like the first volume, so now
Hmm.
there's like a second edition. I guess for me, because people always ask why I self-published it. For me, it was one of those things where like I felt like if I didn't do it if I didn't do it, I would just be one of those authors who uh would show up at a party and was like, "Well, I'm writing a book," and then 5 years later we're at the same party. "Well, I'm still writing that." So, yeah, so I just
I feel that completely. I feel that completely with this manuscript I've been working on. Like I've been working. It's been a couple of years, since I finished that first draft, and
yeah,
it does feel like it's taking forever. But I also try to give myself a little bit of slack because I have a busy life. I have 4 kids. I got a
yeah,
job. I have we are. I have to write at 5:30 in the morning. Now that's when my alarm goes off, and I'm squeezing in whatever I can before I got to get the kids up, and we get make breakfast on the table, and we got to get out the door for school and jobs and all that kind of stuff, and then you know the rest transpires from there. Afternoons are jam packed with other stuff, so it's just I only have a finite amount of time to work on this, and so I try to give myself a little bit of slack on how long it's taking, but also it gets very frustrating because, like you said, like I'm tired of showing up and like, yep, still working on it. Yep, still working on it.
So that was going to be my next question. So you actually do have like a set writing schedule then?
For the most part, yeah. I set, coffee pot starts brewing at 4:30. So by the time I get up, coffee's ready to go, and I'll either sit at the kitchen table or I'll be back here at the office and I'll write until 6:30 is when I got to get the kids up and start
Man,
moving and get ready for work and everything like that. So it's a sometimes it's an hour. And if the kids, our son was in water polo for a while last year, so I would sit at his practice pool on the side of the pool deck and write for 2 hours, and that was great. So I would get that extra time here. So, but right now it's predominantly first thing in the morning. Before the sun's up, I'm sitting at the laptop and hammering away at the keys.
kudos to I mean, kudos to you for like getting up at 5:30 and being able to like, write. Like if I had to get up at like, like I wake up at 7 and usually like I'm still like brain dead at least until like 9 a.m. So yeah,
Yeah,
if I had to get up that early, like I don't know how I could even like get in the shower, let alone,
yeah.
uh
There's days where it doesn't come at all, and then there's days where, a good writing session's like time travel, really. Like those when you're
yeah.
locked in on a good writing session, the time just whips away, and all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, we're late. Like it's 6:40 already, and I'm 10 minutes past where I'm supposed to be. Getting kids up, getting everybody moving, getting the shower, or get my wife a cup of coffee, and just kind of going from there. That's the time I have right now, and maybe that'll change, as the kids get older and start moving on to other things. Maybe the calendar will change a little bit, but
Yeah.
for me right now, it's early in the morning, and there's nothing else going on. The house is quiet, the dogs are still asleep, the kids are still asleep. My wife's even she might be asleep or not, but and I'll just you know sit around and do what I can.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have the advantage of being, a single guy of, for right now without any kids and whatnot. And
Yeah,
like and that's kind of like the other, joke I make with my friends that, well, I want to make it big in writing so that, so then, once I, have a wife and kids, I already have bank, coming in from my books once I'm,
that's right.
a famous author. I don't know if that's actually going to happen or not, but like, hey, it would be nice.
The Jack Carr's got that saying, like, I can't guarantee you it'll be a success, but I can guarantee you it won't be a success if you never do it. So,
Yeah,
you got to
yeah.
keep it plugging away, and that's kind of how I feel. So,
What
we plug away, we work, and
what did you think of Cry Havoc? I see that was
I haven't read it yet. And this
really,
is his first novel that I didn't dive into right away because I was trying to get through my TBR. It came in and I wanted to read Supreme Justice because Eric had me on his podcast. I
yeah,
was reading a couple other things. I think I was reading Casino Royale because I just started reading Ian Fleming this year. My first time, I just started diving into. I got an old vintage collection of Bond novels that I just started recently. Been picking these up. So I read this year. I read From Russia with Love and then Casino Royale. Um,
uh,
Working on through those.
audio. So I listen to audiobooks, and yeah, the Bond audiobooks are, I mean, are fantastic.
Nice. Yeah. So just been trying to work through some of the authors that I know personally, get through their books a
Yeah.
little bit faster before I will get to Cry Havoc because, like I said, Jack Carr, he certainly got me into this world of thrillers and writing, and I have all his novels for sure, and I like to support him when I can. So
Yeah.
I took my dad to his book signing last year when Red Sky Morning came out in Scottsdale at the Poison Pen. So my parents live out in Arizona, so I drove out there for one weekend and then took my dad to see Jack Carr, and we had a good time out there. So that was a fun event and whatnot. But
Yeah,
there's so many books I want to read. Like everybody keeps producing more stuff. Whether it's Terrence Lehue or Luke and Nathaniel, those guys, and everything else that people keep churning out. I'm like, man, there's so much to read,
well,
which is
I
a good thing, I guess.
yeah, well, I mean, I mean, I'm always happy to like send out copies of books to other people in the community. So like I'd be happy to I'd be happy to have you, beta read my next book,
But yeah, send it my way. I'd love to.
if you want. I don't know if you've read any of my other work at all, but
I have not, but I have
so
not. But if you got a place where you want me to start, you send it my way, and
yeah,
I'll you point me in the first book you want me to read, and I'll read it. I'll
that
throw it in the queue.
yeah, no, I mean I'm glad. Yeah, I mean one of the things is like, yeah, I'm with you. Like I have so many books on I have so many books on my TBR pile, as far as like what I want to read, and there are only so many hours, in a day, and so many days in a month, and so many
Yep.
months in a year, etc., etc. So
Yeah, and you want to write, and you want to write, and
yeah,
and you have your own stuff you want to do, and it's just yeah, it's a commitment for sure, and it's like I appreciate the pages I do get to turn and the authors I do get to support, and yeah, if you tell me which book to start with of yours, I'll pick it up and
yeah, it's a fun community to be in. It's the one thing I always tell new writers starting out is uh if you want to like if you're actually serious about this, you actually have to put the time in, to you know you actually have to put the time in, because I've noticed a lot of people, not everyone, but certainly some people, they see me interviewing, all these other authors, and getting copies of other people's books, and they think, oh man, Sam's getting all that free and he's talking to all these cool people. I want that. And it's like, well, I'm getting those free books because, it's not just gifts. People send stuff for me to read, and so, it's more of like a community. You know, we all we all exchange stuff, and then, also same with, interviewing. Like, yeah, I do love to just talk to people, but it's also, we're trying to help each other out and help promote. It's not, just because I'm a quote unquote famous author, which is kind of, it's weird a little bit, because in my mind I'm like, well, I'm still just, a nobody. Um, in the grand scheme of things. I guess like, social media, like that's the other thing. Like there's a perception on like what fame is has like really changed. I might be more
sure.
famous than I might be more famous than, person X, but then, I'm not a Jack Carr, by any means. You know, I'm if I'm lucky, I might get the chance to, meet Chris Pratt, you know, one day.
Yeah, that was a wild about like BoucherCon. You're walking through the lobby bar, and it
Yeah.
was like the first night, and I'm just cruising through, and there's authors everywhere, just sitting around hanging out. And I walk by one table and look down, and, there's an author, T.D. Donnelly. He looks, I was like, "Hey, James," and I'm like, "Hey, Tom," and like to me, he's a yeah, he wrote on the script for Sahara, the Clive Cussler novel. He wrote on that script. He's written a bunch of scripts for Hollywood. He's got a couple books out, and he's like, I'm like, "How the hell do you know me?" He's like, "Social media." I'm like, "Oh, okay." It's just funny how you kind of you get known in this community, and it's kind of fun, and it's cool that
Yeah, I
your name does go
actually
somewhere.
funny thing about that, I actually so one of the people who picked up so if so my late uncle used to collect Playboy magazines. So when he
Right.
pa- so when he passed, I inherited his stash. In a few years ago, one of the playmates actually did like a podcast kind of on the history of Playboy. So I had her on my podcast just to talk out like, what her experience was and whatnot. And so she actually picked up one of my books and was like promoting it. And so I started getting all this, all these messages, from people in that community who were like, if the magazine were still in print, like you should have, submitted your, short stories in there. And so
Yeah.
it was like, wow, that's cool. And then there's actually a reference to one of Playmates in Cry Havoc, because you know it
Mm.
it's part of the Vietnam, so people were messaging me like, hey, did you catch that reference, or stuff like that. So
Yeah,
you never know who you're going to run into in the author community. So it's been a very cool experience. So
for sure. Yeah, condolences on your late uncle, by the way.
so
You wrote a very touching post about your uncle, and that I also had a late uncle about 10 years ago that passed away, also collected Playboys, and but his collection went to his I believe my cousin. So I talked to my cousin about daily. So yeah,
yeah.
so condolences out to your uncle. I certainly know what it's like to lose somebody you're close to in that realm, in that space when they're involved.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. He was also a firefighter, and I think I posted this on Facebook too, but his fire helmet is actually, it sits right over my desk. So
Ah,
so I'm actually looking at it right now as as we're talking. And he I mean, I'm probably gonna do like a fuller length podcast on his life, because he had a pretty amazing life. But he was he was one of the ones who, when I was a kid, he encouraged me to, pick up the first James Bond
nice.
novels. And you know, I was one of those kids where young adult literature at the time in the 2000s just was like, it was really predictable, and just really, you know it wasn't anything that captivated my attention. And so
Okay.
he was one of the ones where, well, I know you like the movies, the James Bond movies. You might like the books too, and they're not super long either. That's the other thing, is getting through a 500-page novel, to me at least, seemed super daunting.
Yeah.
And now, even as a writer, like, my books aren't super long either. So I think that's the other thing, is reader appetites are kind of changing too. We're kind of going backwards. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, the whole thing with Veritas that was cool too is, like, Veritas is the only outlet that I've submitted to that has published my other work. I mean, I've submitted other places, and I've self-published stuff. Like, that's the other thing too, is if you don't get picked up anywhere, then you might say, okay, well, I've tried everything. Um, it might be time to self-publish. The other thing too is, um, I think a lot of publishers, they see that you have published stuff, and so then when you submit stuff, they might be able to say, well, James actually has written stuff, so he actually knows what he's doing. So that's always helpful too. There's no one way to go about this, is the thing I've learned. So Yeah, yeah. That's the other thing though too that has kind of been that's something that like I'm still trying to navigate. Not so much the price range. It's like, you know, you sell a book for $20 on Amazon and then, for a print copy, right? And I always get people who are like, well, Sam, why are you pricing the book at $20, in this economy? And it's like, well, I'm not actually making $20, pe your average person, they think that we're making, the full, 10 or 15 or $20 or whatever it is off the copy. And it's like, well, no, regardless of whether or not you're doing self, publishing or, even traditional publishing, you're getting a fraction of what the book sale actually is. The reason I, price stuff at like, 15, $20 depending on the book length is so that I can actually make like, $6 or, and have like a royalty that is actually worth, is actually like worth something as opposed to, just 75 cents or something. It's the economics too, and I think more people are getting aware of that, but it's still like explaining, and I get it. Like the economy isn't great right now, but that's also why I tell people like maybe instead of supporting Stephen King, who already has millions of dollars, maybe go out and support an Eric Bishop or a James Dawson or someone who was a smaller author who could use the support. You know, so. Well, sir, is there anything else that you want to? I know that you're still in the process of writing stuff, so I'm not sure what if there's anything to really promote. But where can people find you at, and kind of what's next for you? I guess. Yes. Yeah, yeah, please do. I would love to, talk to you more about, the books, specifically. But like I said, I mean, I think having you on to kind of talk out, the startup, process where you're at now, I think it's super valuable. I really want to thank you because a lot of authors they don't want to talk about their process until they have, something done because they have anxiety or whatever, which I understand. But I really think it's helpful for people to hear about the process while it's kind of a working process. So I appreciate you taking the time to share your input as well. Um, yeah. So have a Merry Christmas, sir, and folks. I really appreciate you for tuning in and listening to this chat with James and I. And if you're enjoying this, please subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, like, comment, and subscribe, as they say. And I will link things to I will link James's socials and website in the profile in the show description, and then as always, you can find all my links in the description notes as always. And like I said, folks, we're going to air this Christmas week, I guess. So Merry Christmas to everyone, and thanks for tuning in. So take care.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.